So I mentioned that this is like the second chapter of a journey that Samuel, no, you initiated with Kohler, and the key word of this experience of this journey seems to be nature, no, nature power. So I wanted to ask you, and then I'm going to follow up with Sabine and with David, how this idea of nature, how have you been able to translate this idea into the product, into the installation, into the concept 360?
Firstly, thank you for such a gracious and elegant introduction to all that here, and we thank you for your time. We know it's an incredibly busy week, and we're so elated for you to be able to enjoy the space. And as you were saying, this notion of the collaboration really came about first thinking about how two studios from different continents and different parts of the earth can come together to celebrate wider existential questions such as the notion of the movement of water. I don't necessarily think of Kohler as just delivering sanitary solutions. It's more so vessels which deliver water, and that being such an underpinning requisite of modernity. And we really wanted to be able to celebrate the fluidity of water through exploring form and other cadences that I'm sure we'll get into in conversation.
And what about you, Sabine, like nature? And I mean, the elements are like such an important also inspiration for your work. So how do you also combine these two dimensions?
I think that there are two ways in which I look at water and nature in the context of some of the shapes and forms and textures that exist across Formation O1 and Formation O2. The first was more so the sheer volume of a natural mineral such as water being transported to various locations and distributed safely. The second component was more so of course, by nature, the liquidity and the fluidity and formlessness of water itself, and bringing that to match some of the gestural shapes and forms and concaves that you see within the products themselves. And the second component was, if we take a step back and think about how mineral stone and calcified stones and marbles are kind of shaped through high pressure use of water or natural erosion across the Dolomites or across volcanic lands in terms of pebbles forming with a beautiful asymmetry. I wanted to be able to talk about the formlessness of water in nature alongside the sheer weight and physical properties that water can have to reshape mineral and reshape stone. So those are probably the two factors of nature really being at the forefront of the shape and form and the experience of the partnership.
And I mean, can you give us like a bit of an insight about like the research and development, the process, and maybe this is also something where also David can give us like some insights, from the company perspective. So how, choosing the materials and, combining your vision around materials and colors was like rooted in the process of really like researching, testing, prototyping, and how the dialogue with Kohler inform, like the research and the development of the final product.
It's really interesting because at the start of this project, I was working on two solo shows with fine art galleries, and I got into this habit of returning to gestural work by hand. So for the most part, using chalk and ink and clay to determine these new forms. And I really wanted to make sure that I didn't have an end goal in mind for what the forms could look like, because we have such a preconceived and consolidated view of what water solutions are. I wanted to move quite far away from having an end goal. But what that did is it actually led to these quite lucid and radical forms and wider questions around the movement of water and gestural markings which accompanied that as part of the research or R&D development process to lead to new material developments. So some of the forms that were proposed for, let's say, Formation O1, the tap, which has this beautiful liquid-like asymmetry to it, that came about from a chalk sketch. And it was then a case of how do we bring such a agile form to reality. Or to do so, we had to look into the archive of new material developments that Kohler had been working on, but maybe hadn't applied to use yet. And we ended up actually patenting a new recycled epoxy resin titled Neonite, which was able to hold the form alongside a new patent which was registered for the front water spout, which you see on Formation '01. Similar, go ahead.
This was the very first time that like the company Kohler used this kind of material for an actual product?
Commercially, yes.
Commercially,
It was
yes.
already within their library, but we made some tweaks to it and then went forward to use that recycled epoxy resin because it could hold the form without, disrupting any of the actual use case. When it comes to Formation '02, you could imagine we had several conversations internally of, do we go with slip casting? Do we go with ceramic for the toilet? Do we look into 3D printing? And the idea of treating Formation '02, the toilet, more so closer to an artist edition of a sculpture led to us considering how do we not necessarily waste resources. So we decided to move into 3D printing to do so. So each edition you see is a one of one to a degree, which avoids, wasted metals and processes being invested when they may not be necessarily needed. It's more so about treating it as an artistic process and developing one of ones.
Yeah. And David, this was like a pretty exciting, new, like disruptive experience from your standpoint. It was like not very art somehow driven. No, it feels. I mean, we're like the center of. I mean, this is like, of course, to functioning product, but at the same time, this is like an art installation. It's a broader vision. So how was the dialogue and the process of working
I
with
think
Samuel?
it's everything, right? And that's one of the wonderful things about Samuel is he's a remarkable artist and he's a very deep thinking designer. And throughout our history, I think Kohler's been a company that's helped artists realize their dreams. We've had an arts industry program for 50 years. We're celebrating our 50th year. And this is, I think, another example. Samuel had an incredible dream, an idea of what this installation would be, celebrating water, as well as the forms and how it shapes things. And I think we were able to work with him to bring it to life in the Palazzo. But at the same time, he's an incredible person to work with because he's got a mind that understands design as well as engineering and technology and how to bring things together. And I think with our team, we're able to do these two incredible products that need kind of technological support behind it and design support behind it. And I think Kohler was uniquely positioned to help bring the faucet as well as the toilet to life. And as Samuel said, it pioneered new process technology with 3D printing as well as the material technology we used with the faucet. So it's been a great journey. And one of the great things about artists and Samuel is they push you into uncomfortable new frontiers and you learn and you grow and you see the future through that. And this toilet is unlike anything that's ever been developed. It's an art object. It's a beautiful piece that also serves an important function.
Yeah, and tell us more about this like color that is, of course, defining the installation here, the product itself, but at the same time, it's a color that we find throughout your art practice, your like spatial design practice. So why orange?
It's interesting. I could roll off a dissertation, but I don't want to bore anyone too much.
We had this
on it.
conversation
We did.
before, so I probably know the answer, but I think it's a super interesting angle. So
Completely. I
Yeah.
think there's something about looking at, mid-century European color theory. If you think of like Joseph Albers and his use, and I think back to like schooling as a graphic and product designer and the impact of his use of color isolation had on myself. There's also the use of, rich colors being placed, of course, across industrialized environments globally. So there's a spirit of democratic use when it comes to the use of orange. There's also this relationship we have to seeing it in often fleeting and agile environments. If you think about temporary facades and architecture in, like, you know, downtown New York or in Milano, if there's some type of renovation happening, or in London or in these global cities, we're used to seeing it as an inflection point to catalyze and control space. So when you see these Volt colors which kind of cut through desaturated environments, they pull your attention in, and there's this not necessarily urgency, but a sense of movement and energy to them, which I think is interesting to kind of propagate. And everyone okay up there? Okay. So beyond that, it's more so using color to amplify, I guess, the amount of mass an object can take up in visual space. It becomes almost a literacy of sort. And I guess that's where I was going with the notion of the toilet being a piece of sculpture for the most part, because we look to firstly increase the volume of its coverage by about 20% to the average toilet that you would expect to maybe use or see, which gave more surface for the color to become far more impactful. It almost becomes an architectural facade or object or hoist on its own, and the color just helps to amplify that.
And Sabine, this is like, of course, brings it to your work, because it's so much informed by almost obsessive research about materiality, colors, specific palettes, specific surfaces. So I think that the output, it's like so different from, you know, Samuel's, but at the same time, I think that there is like so many common threads that informs your work. So I'm also curious to have your angle on how do you research materials, how you pick like a specific color for an object, for a sculpture, for a space, and yeah. Can you give us like an insights into your world?
It's a loaded question.
I know it's a lot of questions.
Where to
in one
start?
question.
Actually, the first thing I thought of when I saw this color, this is a side note and it doesn't answer your question, but I did the exhibition at the Char Depot at the Vitra campus in 2022. It's still on now, but it's kind of categorizing how they show their design collection. And they have a collection of 7,000 items, and only 400 that were able to be exhibited. And historically, it's always been in a chronological order. And then I sort of rethought that, and it's all categorized by color. And
for the first time in Vitra's history, they're categorized by color, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting because we could have done the whole exhibition in black, because the majority of all the furniture that they had collected was black. But then there were all these other colors that we were able to categorize, but they all had very different hues. So within the green spectrum, there was like every chair had a completely different hue. But then in the orange section, everything had this exact color. It's like, I think it also has something to do with that this is not really, it's a very sort of artificial color, whereas with green, our eyes are used to seeing so many different hues of green in nature, and this is like a color that is somehow also a warning.
Doesn't exist in nature.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
And then it's like we gravitate to this specific orange as like the orange. I think it has a powerful thing behind it, ranging from like the 60s, you know, to last year, what was presented at the in the Char Depot. But yeah, I don't know, how do I use color? It's a tool for sure. Mm-hmm. It's a way to bring out certain effects and depth. I always try to make objects and installations that trigger some kind of an emotion, and color is, well, color and light in combination. Obviously, color is very much affected by light as well, and you can manipulate both light and color with each other. And you can also really change people's perception of space through color. So how you feel when you're in a space, depending on what kind of color you're surrounded in. So I think for me, it's like it's equally as important as every other element in a project, if not more, that you can use it as a tool to amplify things.
I think that was so well said, and it's a really important factor you raised about it not necessarily occurring in nature and it being one of the advantages of it. And it also kind of really represents this advent shift of like a post-war industrialized world when you see like the influence of like synthetics being accessible and like the democratization of consumer goods after that period. So there are all these little quirks and cadences tied to the history of its use and tied to the history of plastics, which I find kind of interesting as like processes, which is why you'll see across Formation 01 and 02 and you know, the slightly more, you know, brutalized or industrial cadences that are exposed, keeping that design history of material development or reference in place, ideally.
Yeah. And what something that really, I mean, pops out is this sort of more heavy duty aspect of your work, I think, in general, and of course also here for this Kohler collaboration. So there is this very, let's say, natural, almost like sensual, of course, feeling, which is given by, of course, the element, water, but at the same time, the volumes, the shapes, the forms, they have almost like a brutalist quality, which I think defines your aesthetics a bit 360. So what attracts you to these kind of solutions, heavy duty, brutalist, industrial shapes and forms and materials?
I think there are almost, you know, two influences to it. One is, again, back to studying it was the movement of almost like, you know, the building of council estates in the 1950s and the 60s and seeing places that I felt partly
in the
familiar
UK,
with.
like
In the UK.
yeah, UK like British brutalism.
Absolutely. And the influence of brutalist architecture in terms of living amongst it. You know, we've had huge architectural facades and bus stations in like the East Midlands and Northamptonshire that have been pulled down as, you know, failures of brutalism and failures of utopia. And I guess to a certain degree, having grown up in like an underclass and working class environment, there was a familiarity in the use of color and form that I felt slightly akin to. You know, in earlier projects, I would always say there's a slight difference of living with brutalist architecture and with public housing rather than being outside of the sandbox to it. So there are elements and deep ties to these architectural movements that I'd say have partly shaped a lot of my experience and core memories, you could say. There's also something which is deeply democratic about the use of industrial materials being propagated and finding new ways to have almost an alchemaic property to them. You know, if I think back to some of the furniture works I've developed, such as Trauma Chair, you know, we've taken a synthetic wood such as OSB and we've fired the wood and lacquered it and recontorted it until it looks like an African Regnier wood. So this idea of being able to reinvent raw material and recontextualize it without kind of losing the anchor or the roots intentionally to still ensure the work falls within a historic index of design is one of the reasons why I continue to kind of push and prod and expand on these type of design movements within the practice.
Yeah. And Sabine, on the other hand, I think that I couldn't define your work as brutalist. There is like definitely like a sense of like a, you know, great sensuality is very is playing a lot with like the idea of like softness or even playing with like a sort of camouflage effect. Maybe a material that looks soft but it's very hard. So how, you know, going back to the question that I asked before, your work, I think, is you're famous for using resins, for example, or like stones. So what attracts you to these kind of materials and how the research behind the materials happen
I think the
in your
most
work?
exciting thing, or the thing that makes me want to be a designer, is that I'm just super, super curious about materials and how you can process them and how you can manipulate them and create more out of them than what you perceive at first glance. That's definitely also the reason why I love to work with glass and cast resins, because those materials lend themselves so well to manipulation, and you could go from completely transparent to completely opaque and all the different surface finishes, reflection. It's all these qualities that really allow you to play with light and color again. But also natural stone. I think what's mesmerizing about natural stone, and maybe more specifically onyxes, is that that's something that's been formed in earth for so many years, and that's amazing. And then to think of like having the honor of working with that material and creating something else from it. So for sure, the way that I design, I'm not the type of designer that sits down with a sketchbook and like, this is my next piece. I really have to be hands-on in the factory, really analyzing also what the possibilities of manipulating and manufacturing those materials are. And I think it's also my job as a designer to go into external factories and rethink how the way that they've always been manipulating the materials can be tweaked, or like, I can look at it with a fresh eye. And when I'm lucky that when there's companies that are open to those ideas, then I think really interesting projects can happen.
And can you what Sam just said about these, growing up in a urban environment like British brutalism? Can you also recognize somehow like a sort of genesis of these, attraction that you have for these kind of materials, of colors? Is something that is like rooted in your childhood, or like in the environment that you grew up with, or it's something that was maybe more, inspired by the work of artists or like other forms of inspirations?
For sure. I think everything that comes in from very early on to even yesterday becomes output as designers. I grew up in nature in New Zealand, and I spent a lot of time in the mountains specifically.
Yeah.
And I definitely, I'm also, again, not a very like, I don't like to analyze things too much. I work very intuitively, but obviously with, the profession, I get asked a lot of questions by journalists, like, where does your inspiration come from? And it has forced me to
like
sort
now,
of...
so
Yeah, no, but it's interesting because it does force you to think, like, actually, where does it come from? I don't know.
Yeah.
It just...
It's like a psychoanalysis session.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to, you like...
Sometimes you just feel.
I will tell you where it comes from. No, but I definitely feel the fact that I had a sort of like a snowboarding past before becoming a designer.
I know about that.
And just I still draw on those experiences, how you can really change your perception of space depending on what lenses you're wearing. So you can create more depth in your vision, or you can combat the sun with reflective lenses. And I just thought that was so powerful when I started studying design. I was like, that's something you can really use as a tool to create objects or experiences with. And I definitely still do that. I filter with glass and color, and I try to change people's perspective on their surroundings by the installations. And for sure, I don't think if I hadn't spent all that time in the mountains above the clouds, that I would have the same output I have now.
Amazing. So next question for Samuel and also for you, David. It's about like time traveling, because this project, the one that you presented in Miami and this second chapter here in Milano, it has like a strong futuristic, I think, feeling to it. But at the same time, Kohler is a company that is like 150 years old on one end, and right now we're like in a old Milanese palazzo. So I'm very interested to hear from both of you how these, let's say, dichotomy, between the past and a vision of the future is combined into your work as an artist and a designer, and is your work as an entrepreneur. So yeah, past and future, history and innovation, how they're combining into this specific project and in your practice more at large.
Absolutely. I think that I've got this real deep reverence and love for the history of Venetian and Milanese palazzos and what they've represented historically of canons of democratic experience, them being courtyards for people to be able to engage in trade or within the arts or within dance or opera historically. So the notion of the engineering of social space with democracy in mind is at the forefront when it came to being able to have some type of creative perspective within this space. The second component I wanted to focus on was, one, just the quality of engineering to take, society to such a status that we're in now, and the notion again of tying back to Kohler, the magnitude and the advent of human plumbing getting to such an advanced state. Hence why we decided to expose at least some type of allegory or visual effigy of that with the tubes and with the pipes to kind of show the limitlessness of the form, making up words as we go here, but also ensure that there is this magnitude which is captured visually in a very democratic language. We want people to enter the space and feel something before they have to think about it.
Yeah, like a friction almost.
Absolutely, and we were kind of talking about the notion of design propagating art, but enabling the user to touch. Mm-hmm. The user can touch within art. So you consider weight and haptics and temperature. There's much more of an authority within the notion of art, the same way that a populace has an authority over a public space, such as a palazzo. So all of these different thoughts came into mind, and some of them existed before the invitation was so gracefully put forward by Kohler, because I just kind of really love to research how, of course, public space can be leveraged.
And David, how the legacy of your own company, inspire the future of the company? So are you going back to the archives, to the previous experiments? Is the past inspiring your vision of the future?
So I think there's always a blend of your history with current thinking. If you look at this color that Samuel's landed on here in one of his signature colors, we had a tiger lily orange in the 1970s, and so a lot of these things we're reintroducing a number of heritage green colors this year. So you see elements of our past throughout our current day and in the future. And if you look at the faucet that Samuel designed, the base material that he picked was cast iron. That was the original material that started our company 150 years ago, and we still produce today in Wisconsin. So you always see elements of our past and our heritage in who we are. But the only reason we've survived 150 years is because as proud as we are of our heritage, we're always trying to pioneer for the future. And the ethos of the company is really that entrepreneurial spirit, to innovate, to challenge the future, and to find ways to grow and bring new and unique designs and technologies to the market. And so it's this combination of being proud and supporting and retaining certain traditions, but at the same time progressing forward. And I think Samuel's a terrific example of that, because he deeply respects the legacy and the heritage and the history of things, but he's also boldly challenging the future.
Yeah, and these are objects. I mean, the two objects, the faucet, the toilet, are like strongly technologically advanced. Also, so the theme of technology and innovation, I think it's very interesting. And in the last years, with the pandemic, I think that the idea of domesticity, changed completely, and this concept of like the smart home and how technology inform industrial design is super present in the discourse. So what is your take on this idea of like technology combined to industrial design and in the sphere of domesticity,
That was one of the perfect alley-oops and tee-ups, actually, because this is one of the reasons why I wanted to be in conversation with Sabine here. If I think about designers and artists of a particular generation who understand like the lexicon and the index of what's happened over the past 100 years within industrial and product, and the gray area between functional design and sculptural art, there needs to be a tension point in which the rules are, of course, respected and determined, but then our generation as we start to move beyond the baby steps of understanding the fundamentals, looks to pull apart and antagonize and question what we have to say as maturing designers, or junior designers who are moving into signatures of a practice. And I believe that, alongside my own work and others who come to mind, Sabine's work also is able to capture this canon of the past, whilst also recontorting what the future of design can look like. We've both been having these separate conversations on, we understand the anchors of what supposed good design is supposed to be, but each generation's duty really to the arts is to recontort that, and to question and to challenge and to fail and to succeed as part of that journey. So I'd say moving beyond the idea of what a endpoint is, moving past minimalism, trying to push into new views of what maximalist design can be, new orientations of brutalism, is almost part of a broader endeavor of making sure that we keep a future which is partly uncertain but holds space for newness to come about.
Yeah. What about you, Sabine? Are you you recently did like some beautiful experiments also with like car design, so your work has like a strong artistic, almost cultural quality, but at the same time you're like doing experiments in industrial design and even innovation and technology. So how do you combine these two dimensions, one that is more artisanal, rooted in craft, artistic, and one that is like also facing a lot of innovation issues and technological questions?
For sure, I like to keep myself and my team just super challenged. I think there's nothing worse than feeling stuck or comfortable. I think comfortable is actually worse than stuck. And I think we hold a lot of responsibility as designers in many different ways. And I really like to just be able to work in many different fields so that you tackle challenges in different ways. And certain challenges in one project can really feed and fuel a solution for a different project. I think because I've been working with the same material, for example, glass, for already like almost 15 years, that we're able to really build a lot of knowledge on that production process, and then also to keep trying to push it forward, and also very relevant to the times, because I think it's irresponsible to keep working the way you've always been working just because that works. I think now, there's so many challenges in the world, specifically sustainability and the climate crisis, that no designer should be blind to that. And what we've really been working on recently with the glass production is to analyze the similarities between how my mirrors and installations are produced. It's a lamination process. So it's lots of layers stuck together. Solar panels are produced in a very similar way. So it was like, can those solar cells also be integrated into my glass products without compromising aesthetic? Because I think the biggest problem, or I see a bit of an issue with when products are kind of forced to, or not forced, or trying to be sustainable in a certain way, that certain aesthetics are also forced on them. And I think it's then my role as a creative to try and make that technology invisible, so you don't even need to know about it. So the first time that we really implemented that on a larger scale was at an exhibition in Cairo, where I created a sundial that was really using the forces of nature, sunlight, to indicate time in an analogical way, because it was, creating shadow and reflection. But then also within the materiality, you had the solar cell embedded. So all day long, the object is charging and then lighting itself up at night, so it becomes a completely off-grid object. But again, if I didn't tell you that, you wouldn't know, because it doesn't look like a solar cell. So I think just always trying to push what you can get out of materials and how they can be better and not passive, but that you just get much more out of it. I think is a really important challenge. And then on the other end, I'm at the moment working on a really interesting project in Japan, which is in a way trying to save certain industries from dying. Like, there's this amazing crafts there that there is just, no next generation to take them on. I'm working with this amazing lacquerware company, and the current owner is like generation 5, and generation 4 had 170 employees, and the current generation has only 9 employees. So trying to also show that those crafts, that there's value in it, and it shouldn't just die out because a rice ball is easier to make out of plastic now than lacquerware. But then shifting it to a different industry, if we make collectible design out of it that can have a higher price tag, then maybe their whole industry, or at least that company, can shift their focus to that and see a way of surviving. I mean, I'm not pretending to save anyone's business, but it's still, I think it's interesting to keep being aware of everything that's happening within the industry and still, respond to that.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that we're
We're
running out of time, but I have a question for you, David. How these I mean, this to me it's really one of the most experimental collaborations maybe that you have done with Kohler. What have you learned, as a CEO from this experience, and what's next for the company, and what will you bring with you from this experience with Samuel, and for future collaborations, and in general, what's next for Kohler?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So what we've learned throughout our history and our experience with Samuel is no different. And that's to celebrate and harness the spirit of creators. And for our 150th anniversary, our slogan was "Come all creators." And for our next 150 years, we're going to continue to harness the spirit of creators, because we've learned that investing in creators and innovators is really the best way to define the forward path of the company. And so, we always would say the best is yet to come. As much as we've done, we're very excited about the bold future ahead. And I know Samuel has further ideas of where he wants to take his design and his art. And we're there to support that, as well as the other creators we work with. And we have a great stable of creators inside the company as well. Many are here today and who built the company. And so we're very excited about the future.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, David, Sabine, Samuel. Very exciting conversation. And if there are any questions from the audience, maybe we have time for a couple of questions. Anyone? Nobody?
We'll be around anyway if anyone wants to have a private chat after.
One question there.
Yeah, well, it's a great opportunity for our team to be able to work with a great artist and designer. And so I think it creates a lot of energy and excitement in our company because our team works with Samuel and his team. And so we have engineers working together with industrial designers and marketers. We're all managing this relationship on a very close basis with Samuel, and he's got an excellent team. So I think in all of that is growth and advancement and new processes and new thinking. So it does help us, grow as a company. And it's the only way you could accomplish a task like this that starts with a sketch, and you can see some of the original sketches and bring it to life.
Absolutely. I think that's a great vantage point to talk about the expertise of both of the teams. You know, within SRA, we're a relatively lean team of around 6 to 8 people, and we work intimately and closely with, 2 full-time architects within the practice. A legal team, of course, which you must have, and other cadences involved. So there's this opportunity to almost switch out the word, because I've done quite a few historically of collabs or collaborations, and change it into co-studio. And I think that was the main requisite established from the very, very beginning of this race line, that we wanted to move and mature the format of collaborations forward and enable longer lead times to, as Sabine was also attesting to, ensure that there are material developments which consider the needs of the now from a sustainable standpoint, and also an overuse and wastage standpoint integrated. Often if you have some type of short run, which is say a 6-month or an annual term, there's not really enough time to be able to catalyze on new technology which is on the cusp of being released. Whereas establishing a longer timeline, making sure the teams have a point of call on both sides, has enabled this to breathe a little bit and also mature to develop a cadence which is maybe not always seen in co-studio projects. We tried to also document elements of this on the .com experience. If you are to go to sra.kohler.com, we've been updating that as a portal of sorts with a really unique gamified UX and UI experience over the past 18 months or so. That operates almost as though it's a live diary of sorts, where you can look at schematic drawings, you can look at early sketches, you can look at the prose and the literature and some of the influences behind the project itself. So to answer simply, is having really dedicated teams who are of course specialized and know what they're doing, putting trust in them, but also giving time for ideas to come about naturally.
Sky blue, water, and orange are complementary colors on the color spectrum and the energy that causes visually?
It's a really good point. I didn't specifically consider that, but there's definitely this notion of orange being able to almost, like as Sabine was actually saying, antagonize against natural tones. And I think that that type of volatility, or I wouldn't necessarily call it discomfort, but the lexicon of asymmetry the color has absolutely been at the forefront. And again, how do we use color? I guess it's a relatively simple concept, but using color as an anchor to kind of cover more space has definitely been at the forefront.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Sabine. Thank you, David. Thank you all for joining us today, and enjoy the installation. Enjoy Milano, and grazie a tutti.
Thank you.